Hello there, I'm Miranda Gretton, and this is Take a Moment with NCHC, the show where we talk to you and your colleagues about experiences that affect you. Listen on your drive between patients or in your downtime, whenever you get the chance to take a moment.
I am Dawson. I work as a strategic finance manager, and I am also a health and wellbeing champion for the Trust.
Hi, I'm Ian Bell. I'm the head of service for adult community learning disability services.
Hi, Stephen Worley, head of procurement at the Trust.
Hi, I'm Ewan. I'm a Band 5 rotational physio working in learning disability.
The theme for Men's Health Week this year is to take an opportunity to notice what's going on in your mind and body and give yourself a man MOT. Talking about physical health first, I'm sure that you all know that moderate intensity exercise can lower your risk of things like heart disease and stroke. But what do you all think are some of the barriers to looking after your physical health if you work full time, if you have a family, etc.? And how can men in particular overcome those barriers?
Men might not admit it, is maybe feeling self-conscious about exercise. If you're new to something, it can seem quite intimidating to say go to a gym, go to a class. As a finance person, I'm going to mention finances because there might be financial barriers for people, even more so now with rising cost of living. Things like a gym membership or some activities involve expensive equipment, which particularly now that might just seem like a luxury that people can't afford.
Stephen, Ewan, what are your thoughts on this?
It's the two things, I think. If you ask anybody, what do we not have enough of at the minute? One's time and one's money. It's difficult working full time, long hours, people on different shift patterns, different days, different weekends, etc. And then having a home life as well. So I've got a 5-year-old son, and they are constant. The energy that they give you is invigorating. And I think it was for me kind of coming home and wanting to go down the park and kick the football around with him. And after a couple of minutes, I'm huffing and puffing and he's just full of energy and I'm kind of, couldn't keep up with him. But I think the important thing is making time. I've started running before work in the morning. The alarm goes off. It's so tempting to push that snooze button. As everybody says, nobody regrets going out the door. It's the hardest bit is getting over that doorstep, getting that first foot on the ground. If you're going walking, running, cycling, playing tennis, cricket, golf, whatever, everybody comes back and goes, you know what, I'm glad I did that. And it's that effort of getting out of the door. And once you get over that, everything else becomes a lot easier.
Key thing with me is finding stuff that my friends like doing as well, because I'm still very much early 20s, so want to be socializing with my friends like 24/7 really. And it does tie into what the others have said in that finding a routine with maybe someone else who can kind of badger you and go, come on, let's go to whatever club, or let's do some running or something like that. So for the days that you kind of aren't feeling too motivated, you've got someone else to kind of push you over the line, if that makes sense.
It's what Steve was saying, isn't it? Getting that first foot out of the door. If someone else is there going, come on, you've got to meet me at the park in 10 minutes, let's go. It's that. And if you can't afford a personal trainer, then your mates can do that for you.
NCHC is really good about flexible working. I know that will vary depending on the service you're in, but for example, I'm very much a morning person. I'm not as keen as Steve, I have to say, but I'm able to, my working pattern is that I can start at 10 each morning, so I can go out, run, swim or cycle before work. And that just means if I then work and my day is unpredictable and I end up working late, I've already got the exercise in the bag. And actually, I find it actually helps me. It gets me alert, ready for the working day. So I feel I'm more productive as well by doing it. So there's so many reasons for fitting it around your routine, and it can benefit your work as well.
Yeah, I was going to just come back to something else a little while ago, which I think is important about that feeling of being self-conscious and that potentially being a barrier. From my personal experience, when I started to get back into cycling, this is going back quite a few years, I didn't go out cycling on the streets because I was so, not ashamed would be too strong a word, but I was definitely very self-conscious. And I put my bike in the car and I drive down to Thetford and I go around the forest in Thetford because it was out of the way and people couldn't see me. But that kind of worked for me because eventually you start to feel a bit more confident and you're quite happy to go out, even though as a middle-aged man in Lycra, that still is not a pretty sight. But if you feel okay with it, you genuinely, and neither should you, care what other people think. But sometimes that is a barrier. And I think what Stephen Anna said there's something about getting up early in the morning when there's no one around, that if you think, you know what, I'm overweight or I am whatever, and I don't want to see people see me running, actually you can do it kind of really anonymously, and you build that confidence and you start to feel that's okay, and that opens up more opportunities. And again, that commitment with somebody else, I do just something different now, but I used to do on a Tuesday and a Friday morning, meet friends and do a bike ride at like 6:30. We'd meet up, but we knew we were going to be there. Unless it was absolutely pouring with rain and you call off. And I know if I weren't meeting people, I wouldn't have done it as regularly as I did. Working from home, I managed lots of people. If I knew people were going out and spending 20 minutes, half an hour, having a run, doing some exercise, I'd be happy that people are working flexibly and creatively to build that time into their day, where maybe, like Steve said, at the end of the day, you've got young children, that's not possible.
Yeah, we're in a tech-rich culture, aren't we? There's things on YouTube. There's things you can, it's everywhere you look, you can have access to something. I'm quite lucky. I live in the back end of nowhere, so I can go for a 3-4 mile run and not see anybody. Just get chased by a couple of angry swans is the bit I have to run the quickest at. But self-conscious is definitely a thing. You drive down the road in your car and you drive past somebody running, you don't think twice. So that ability to switch off from the noise and what people are saying, I think is really key in, and finding a way to do that is fantastic.
Do you think that comes with age, though? I mean, I'm interested to hear your perspective on this, Ewan, as the youngest member of the podcast today. At your age, are you more focused on how it looks to others, like how you exercise, what you do?
It's a good question. Personally, no. I've kind of grown up with playing in football teams, that kind of thing. And you kind of have a bit of banter with the lads throughout kind of exercise. So there's kind of always joking there, but I've never really spent too long out of exercise or out of sport for a long period. So if I was to stop playing football for a few years, potentially kind of getting back into a football squad where potentially you don't know anyone and you know you're not as good as you were, that would be my main worry. Going into a group of strangers thinking, oh, are they going to make fun of how good I am, that kind of thing. It's definitely a thing with both genders. I think the difference with potentially guys is that if you were to join a club or a sports club, especially the rugbies, the footballs, those type of sports, potentially another chap would just kind of say it to your face as a bit of a joke. There's no behind the back, talking about behind some back. They'll let you know that maybe you look a bit silly or something like that.
Packaged up in banter, in inverted commas.
Yeah, exactly. And it's some people kind of thrive off that banter and it makes them participate more. You got to have a good relationship with someone before I think you really kind of go into that zone.
We're talking a lot around the sort of general day-to-day keeping yourself fit and how you fit that in. What if there was a health issue? How do you manage that inverted commas banter for looking after yourself and making sure that you do check what needs to be checked?
There is that whole concept of peer pressure. We know how serious it is, and we know that these things, if you don't take notice of them, you end up in a real pickle,
I think we're very good at closing down circles of friendship. When you're in school, you're part of a group of 30. When you go to uni, you're part of a group of 15. You come out to work, you're a group of 10. People move away, life goes on. Suddenly you look around and you've got 4 or 5 friends around you. But that's the number. People don't have 50 friends. People have 4 or 5 friends. And I think absolutely controlling the people that you have around you, because their behaviours influence you as a person, as your personality type, control that ethos. Unfortunately, I think there is some of that male bravado still out there. I think it's less and less than what it has been historically. But it's really important that you look at the people around you and make sure those people are helping contribute to what you're doing and lifting you up rather than dragging you down.
Like, hopefully, fingers crossed, more percentage of people, of guys, are happy to talk about it nowadays, because for so long, I'm guessing it's just been kind of the stoic male personality. You want to be kind of look strong from the outside, but men can actually respect each other if you're able to talk about these things. I do have some friends in rugby teams, which I'm not sure would be quite the same, but
it's definitely moving in the right direction in terms of team sports, and I think that's a great thing, because that's where a lot of the community for men comes from. Men do not visit the doctor as much as women. It's just a fact. In a 2016 GP patient survey, amongst people working full time, 37% of men had seen their GP in the past 3 months, compared to 53% of women. But in terms of working age men like yourselves, what stops you from going to the GP? Are you active in going to your GP, or do you ever think, actually, you know what, I've put it off and now it's been 5 years?
I'm actively going if I have a problem. I'm relatively good health-wise, so I don't tend to go apart from an asthma checkup once a year. But I think the thing that I've battled in the past is a couple of things. Number one is kind of trying to downplay it. I think it's that not wanting to be wasting the time. We hear about how busy everybody is. You go, I don't really want to go because I've got a little bit of a cough. You know, people, you downplay it in your mind and go, well, I won't bother them for that because they've got far more important things to be doing. I think a lot of men probably struggle with vulnerability as well, because it is being seen to be vulnerable. And I'm always comfortable with that, really preach that and practice that. But I think a lot of middle-aged males probably struggle with being seen as being vulnerable. It's a conversation, again, having to phone in sick for work. How many times have we phoned in sick when we've generally been feeling sick, but we feel guilty for doing so?
It's
But
so interesting you say that, because I've got a statistic about exactly that. So this isn't your cough or your cold, but this is mental health. So over half of men with a mental health concern, so this is 52%, were concerned that their employer would think worse of them. So you're absolutely right. It's exactly what people are saying. And it's a reluctance to take time off work for medical problems anyway. So in that same survey, 30% of men wouldn't take time off work for blood in their urine. 40% wouldn't take time off for an unexpected lump. 42% wouldn't take time off for chest pain. It's crazy, isn't it? But it's exactly what you say, and it's that vulnerability.
Just listening to you say those statistics, I think that's terrifying, given what we know. So I'll give an example of when I was convinced I had either sort of bowel and bladder cancer, because I do tend to go straight from 0 to 100 when I have these things. And I was incredibly fortunate. So I'm not belittling, obviously, those things. A while ago now, I started eating and drinking a lot of beetroot juice. And that has a really, really colourful effect when you use the bathroom. But then you kind of look at it and you kind of go, oh my goodness. And then you start Googling and you're not sure. But for me, that was a good thing, because I was thinking, okay, that's different. Do I need to go and see my kind of GP? Then I thought about it and I did a little experiment. Is I stopped taking the beetroot juice and eating the beetroot, and everything went okay. And I thought, okay, that's now normal for me. My anxiety is that because it's normal for me, would I notice if there was blood? I don't know. Hopefully I would. But I would have gone to the GP if it wasn't for Google and be able to kind of check these things out. And I think Google, and that might be part of it. I think people look at stuff and they want to see the explanation that they want to see, and they see it and they don't go to the GP, rightly or wrongly.
Dr. Google, well-known qualified doctor. Everyone puts something in Google and right in, it goes from having a headache to your head falling off, and you'll find you go, I got a bit of a toothache. I'll put it in one website. No, don't like that answer. I'll try again. Don't like that answer. I'll try again. Oh, that one. Yeah, I'll just take some paracetamol and it'll go away. I think that's an asset, but also a liability. I think from a male thing, it might not wanting to accept a diagnosis, because then you have to do something about it. If I've got a constant toothache and I go to the dentist and I've got a toothache, I've got to do something about it. If I don't go, I haven't got a diagnosis. I can just continue ignoring it. And I think that's probably a very prevalent thing as well.
Ian's example was kind of relevant. Funny enough, I have shared this with a couple of family members, and one friend, so now admitting it to loads of people on the podcast, is I would never have done this a few years ago, but I actually did just over a month ago. I went for a wee and it was basically almost pure blood. It was a real shock, and it took a few minutes to register. I just couldn't believe it. And then I did Google, but one thing I'd always say, I'd always use a credible site, because you can go down all sorts of rabbit holes. So I always use NHS. And when I read, I was like, okay, I really need to do something about this, but I still found it a bit difficult. But it just so happened a few weeks earlier, I had listened to a podcast. Sorry, Miranda, it wasn't one of yours. And it was about a guy talking about his health, and he came out with a line, don't die of embarrassment. And I thought, oh, even though it's embarrassing that I'm going to have to phone up and sort of explain this to the receptionist, when I thought about it, it's like I would be stupid not to. It's swallow my pride, and I might be a little bit embarrassed, but it's better than just pretending it hasn't happened, because it was evidently something quite serious. So yeah, I have to say, I'm really relieved it is, after quite a few checks, it is fine. These things seem really serious to us, but you also have to tell yourself, clinicians deal with this every day. It's all these issues are things they deal with every day. So whilst to you it may seem scary and it's like, oh God, I've never heard anyone talk about this, I think you just have to think logically about it and think, really, am I going to be the first person this has happened to? Evidently not. When I went to the doctor's surgery, the two people in front of me were collecting urine sample bottles as well. So it's like, just in this queue already, I'm clearly not the only person who's having some sort of issues. So yeah.
I know I definitely see it a lot as a clinician about any tablets, like medication, that are prescribed to anyone who I treat. There's a massive difference from men to women in, do they take their pain medication, which is prescribed to them to help them through their injury and help them with their rehab. And I think that almost translates to kind of the visits to the GP as well, in that some men may not want to make it easy for them, if that makes sense. They want their body to just get better on its own, rather than having something artificial put into them, any antibiotics or anything like that. And that can be almost kind of tying into pride as well. So then a lot of conversations I have with some of my patients are about taking tablets and education about pain and breaking down the barrier of, oh, I can't have something artificial put into me. It's really important.
And that's really interesting, because coming into this profession, you probably thought it was going to be mostly physical. And actually, you're having to delve into people's mental health as well to encourage them to take their meds, which is just a sort of another layer to it. And coming on to mental health, got another question for you. I'm interested to know if you will get a ballpark with this percentage. So this is according to Men's Health Forum research. What percentage of men wouldn't take time off work for feeling low or down?
60%.
I estimated kind of 75, 80, if not higher. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it was ridiculously high.
It's 85%. So yeah,
Right.
you're absolutely right. It's very high, and that's for feeling low or down. So I'm really interested in your thoughts on that answer, because there are some very scary and shocking statistics about feeling low and down and mental health. I mean, let's think of it in terms of checking in and supporting each other. What are some of the signs, do you think, of a friend who might need support?
I mean, things are changing now. So we are seeing people a little bit more kind of face to face. So I think over the pandemic, given the fact that men generally don't talk about how they feel as much as women generally do, that the signs that someone's not doing okay, I think were even less visible. I'll be curious over the pandemic, when statistics are available in terms of things like suicide for men of all ages. Did they go up through the pandemic because people feeling more isolated? But I think it is kind of noticing, and we do this with the mental health first aid, is that kind of noticing kind of changes in terms of someone's lack of interest in something, their appearance, their demeanor, that kind of sense of not like having a future or talking positively, or those changes. You kind of, if you've known someone a long time, Steve, you had some really good examples there. People you've known for a long time, you've got those 4 or 5 friends, and you kind of know their default settings. Whether they're up, they're down, they're variable, they're always the same, and you're looking for alterations to that. And it might be someone you speak to on a weekly basis, and they phone up, and then suddenly they don't phone you, and you're kind of phoning them, and they're a bit avoidant. I think for men, them being curious and not taking that first, yeah, everything's okay, is difficult, because I think men, I can say it for myself, I can say with quite some force, I'm fine. And I can say that in a way that says, leave it, quite clearly leave it. Now, that might not be what I'm feeling on the inside, but you've got to be fairly brave, even if you've known me a while, to kind of step over that mark again, because I've kind of said enough, regardless of how low or depressed I might be feeling. So I think it is hard to have those conversations when someone kind of puts up a barrier. I would suggest that men potentially put up those barriers more forcefully than maybe women generally do. And then where do you come back with that? Do you leave it a day? Do you leave it a week? Do you not come back to it? And then who knows what's happening? So I think, yeah, that can be difficult.
I've had it where coming back into that normality, I struggled I was working during the pandemic. We were doing loads of stuff, and then kind of when the world opened up again, I found that a bit weird. And I had a moment where I've got a season ticket with Norwich. It was the first game back of the season, and it was an evening game at Carrow Road, and I kind of got to the gate outside with my ticket in my hand, and I felt my hand getting very sweaty. I'm like, I've never had this before, and I had to literally step back out of the queue, go and find somewhere quiet, and just kind of process what was going on. And that caught me completely off guard. I'd never even thought twice about it until I got there at the point of going into a ground with 28,000 other people. Just caught me off guard, and I wouldn't see it coming.
When you felt that moment in the queue and you took yourself off to have a word with yourself, did you talk about it with any of your friends afterwards?
Yeah, I'm really comfortable with that vulnerability. I try and normalize it with my good friends as much as possible, because I want them to do the same with me as much as they are comfortable. And I think all 5 of us on this call can think and very quickly can think of someone that we know very well who has struggled with something over the past 2 years. Ian's right. If people want to put the shutters up, they will put the shutters up. But it's kind of letting people know, listen, okay, well, you say you're fine. I take your word for it. If you're not and you want to talk about something, here's how you do it. Let me know. Here to happy to chat if you want. And I think it is more difficult with men, but you also know with your friends when to push and when not to push the buttons and ask the question. The setting, you'll know them, you know them better than most people. Finding that moment is as important as asking the question itself.
Something I quite like doing to see if one of my friends wants to share with me is potentially talk about my issues first. So I kind of open up the conversation and make it quite a personal one. And then I'll ask an open-ended question to who I'm chatting to, and then hopefully the conversation kind of flows from there.
Yeah, it's role modeling that vulnerability, isn't it? And I think that's really important at work and in our personal lives. It's opened that channel of communication, which is so important. But I do think that now that the world has opened up, we do have more opportunity to go out and check on people sort of face to face and ask those questions. But I'm interested to go back to something Ian said about where do you go from there? If the shutters do go up, where do you go from there? Because if they've said they're fine, is there anything more you can do? Or does that person just have to want to help themselves?
I was just going to jump in. As Steve was speaking, it reminded me of something. So I can think of an example during lockdown where a friend who I generally communicate with by text, I could just tell from the nature of the text, I thought something doesn't seem right. And I tried calling and they were quite evasive. I tried something that worked in that we had a mutual female friend, and I was like, I can tell something is not right, but they're clearly just putting the barriers up. So I just messaged her and was like, can you message this person? And amazingly, straight away, he did open up to her. And it's probably something I've used once or twice since. I think it is one way to answer your question. One way to get around a barrier is sometimes I think it's easier for a man to open up to a woman. Maybe they don't feel as judged.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, because often family members or partners are too close to you potentially for you to want to talk about the issue.
So what I think Ewan described there is about that emotional literacy, having literally the language to describe how you feel. So I think Ewan's is a really, really lovely example where you might be somebody who has that literacy, who is able to be comfortable expressing your emotion. And by doing that and talk about your own issues, you're almost giving that other person the language that they can go, that's it, that's what I think I'm feeling. So you kind of get that role model, but you are giving more than that. You're giving people that words that they can use to maybe describe how they're feeling if that's something they're struggling with. And I think, Randy, your question in terms of people closing down, I think it is just not accepting stuff at face value, but knowing when you're going to back off and you're just going to get more and more resistance. But it's about going away. I think 2 things that men maybe again don't do as well as women is that reflect on that conversation. Just thinking, okay, I'm still worried. What do I do? Talk to someone else. Work out a strategy. There might be 2 or 3 of you. I think, like Alan was saying, to work out how you approach that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's interesting you mentioned emotional literacy, because that is cited as one of the reasons for male suicide in the age bracket of middle-aged men. Generally, many men across all social classes are reluctant to talk about emotions, and men can experience what they call a big build. So they don't recognize or deal with their distress, but let it build to breaking point. And then when they do decide to deal with it, it's at the point of crisis. That point at which you decide to go to the GP is often too late. So let's think about then how there's two things really I want to talk about. How generational stereotyping has affected you in terms of emotional literacy. Quite often our fathers or our fathers' fathers would never have even spoken about any kind of emotions, and so it's how has that shaped you as people? But also, like, how important is it that we teach our children about emotional literacy and the generation that's coming up behind us?
Growing up, my connection with my dad was fantastic. Loved my dad and my parents to bits. Was very, very lucky to have a good childhood. We never really talked about that stuff. That just wasn't us. And I think a lot of, again, the slightly more elder, middle-aged man will probably have that same thing from a time when sort of male emotion just wasn't there. I think a lot of our dads are probably the same. Doesn't mean I know he didn't love me and care for me. We just never talked about stuff. And I think, 5 years ago, I became a dad. One of the first things that came into my mind was kind of what kind of parent do I want to be for my son? The way that my dad did it wasn't wrong. It was different. And kind of taking that and taking the positives from that and going, well, maybe I'll be a bit more this, a bit less that, finding my own way as a parent and encouraging my son to talk about his emotions. I think that emotional literacy, as you're saying, Ian, is there, it's real. We're a lot more aware of things now than what we were 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's okay to get upset. It's okay to be annoyed. If you fall over, it's okay to cry. As men, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be overwhelmed. It's absolutely fine to feel that way. Don't hide it. And having that same conversation with my son, I think we're getting a lot better at it as men. There's still a way to go with it. But one of the key things that, we tell our son is to be nice to people.
It's those conversations with our kids and with not just with our kids but with our friends, to say it's all right to not be all right. Absolutely fine. In fact, nobody, and this is about self-compassion. Look at the situation. Don't look at you as a person. Look at the situation. Anyone would struggle in that situation. This isn't you failing. This is a really hard thing that you're going through, and anyone would struggle. And as soon as you reframe it like that, you realize it's not about you being weak or not able to cope. It's that it's just a really hard situation. On the Men's Health Week website, it talks about the next step for your man MOT, which is to think about what your health priorities are. So let's just go around and you tell me what your health priorities are and see if you could maybe influence somebody listening to make one of yours theirs.
One area where I probably could do a bit more on mental health is just the reflection time. I know Ian mentioned this earlier. As men, we're probably not as good as women at reflecting on things, and I think I could do with spending a bit more time reflecting. I think that would be another benefit to my mental health. But I think it's important to realize if you do something for your physical health, it's probably going to help your mental health as well.
I think if I could kind of sum it up, it would be try something new, exercise socially. Don't think you've got to do 2 or 3 hours of exercise. Do what you can when you can, and it does add up. You will notice that difference.
The starting point is just to realise that life is tough. It's difficult. Give yourself a break. Getting through a day is an achievement. Find that motivation. What's motivating you? Is it internal or is it external? Are you doing it for yourself or you do it for someone or something else? Get to the why of it. Be okay with it. Be comfortable with it. And if it's an external thing, if it's I'm going to run 5 miles and get myself a new pair of trainers or a new jacket or something, do it. Kind of give yourself that structure to do it and achieve it.
Sometimes kind of people my age you can easily spend an hour of your day just kind of flicking through messages, flicking through your feed. Maybe try and take half an hour away from that and do something active for half an hour. So yeah, just kind of encourage any of the listeners to do that. And just you may feel like you want to be on your phone and reply to those people, or kind of just watch a video, but on some days that is fine, but try and change it up a little bit, and trust me, you won't regret it.
Thank you for listening to Take a Moment with NCHC. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please visit the podcast intranet page to leave a comment and for details of our other episodes. You can also follow NCHC on all social media channels.